Hi, I'm Carrie with Clay Revolution, and today I'm going to talk to you about the strength of the connections you make in your metal clay. We're going to talk about paste versus syringe versus straight clay, really how to use each one and what's the best for each type of connection that you're making. Okay, so I've got a few things here for you to look at as I talk about the different types. You've got really what we're talking about doing is joining two pieces of metal clay together. Whether it be wet clay, dry clay, wet to dry, it doesn't really matter in this part of the conversation, but I'm talking about the strength of the actual connection itself. Okay, so there are a few things that you can do. You can use just water, wet the two sides and kind of rub them together, and it will stick. But what you've done is, in between those two pieces, you have no actual metal particles. So once it's fired, all of that binder is gone. So that's going to be the weakest join that you could make. It will work just fine for certain types of designs, but if you're needing to ensure some strength, you don't want to use just water. You would want to use a paste, a syringe, or straight clay. And I'm going to talk about the differences here a bit. So, paste or slip, they call it a couple different things really. In ceramics, it's just slip. In metal clay, we call it paste. It is just watered down clay. Okay, so you can see kind of the consistency of it here. It's just a watery clay body. You can purchase it directly. You can make your own by just adding water to a little lump of clay and mixing it in really well. Now, that is a water-based paste. So what you've done it essentially is the metal particles that are in there, you've added water which has separated those particles. Okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with that. You've just weakened the metal structure within the joint, okay? Rather than it being straight clay. So it's just a slightly weaker bond than straight clay would be between two pieces, okay? You could make an oil paste, which is made with essential oils. Most people use a lavender to make oil paste. Again, that's creating essentially the same structure as a water-based paste. Now, what oil does is oil won't evaporate as it's drying. It doesn't go away until the burn off phase. So it will help hold pieces together a little bit during the drying process. And what that will do is then when you get to the sintering process, they will stick a little better because they'll be a little closer together at that point. Okay, so that's paste. So now let's talk about the syringe a bit. Syringe is a thicker version of paste. It does have some properties that are different in the binders, but it is a heavier, more dense material than your standard paste is. Most syringes on the market come with a bit of a additive. Most companies will use a glycerin type of material for it, and that additive makes it bond a little bit better in the clay state. Again, you are weakening the metal bond because it's not straight clay, you've added more additives to the clay. Okay? However, very, very, very strong. So when I say that you're weakening the bond, I don't want to alarm you. I'm just trying to explain that straight clay is going to have the most metal particles per volume. And just a water connection, obviously, would have the least metal particles per volume. So that's kind of what we're talking about, is which ones are stronger than other connections. Okay? So when you use a paste, you do want to wet the clay that you're working on a little bit. Put that paste right in there and stick those two things together. It makes a great connection. Paste is very strong and generally is a good thing to use in seams, things where you need to fill some gaps and it's kind of tough to do that. Paste will work. I'm sorry, syringe will work really well for you. Okay. The last thing I'm going to talk about is straight clay. And what I mean by that is connecting two pieces of clay with clay and not using any additives. So I've got a couple scrap pieces of clay sitting here so I could demonstrate it a bit for you. Um, what we're going to do is we're going to lightly dampen our clay. It doesn't need to be wet, it just needs to be a little bit damp. So I'm going to connect those pieces right along those seams. So I'm going to put a little bit of clay in between here, a little bit of water in between there. And what that helps do is it kind of breaks open the surface of the clay a little bit. That'll help those bonds. Okay, and let's put that one there. So all I'm doing is pressing them a little bit so that they stick together so that I don't have to try to hold them together while I'm working. Now I'm going to use regular clay and a rubber tip sculptor. Okay, there's lots of different shapes of these. Use whichever one you like. You could also use something like a spatula to do this process. I kind of like the rubber tip sculptors a bit better, but the spatula will also work. I take a little tiny piece off and I'm going to roll it into a bit of a snake roll sort of so that I can lay it down between my clay. Lay it down there. Can't get that one to stick. There we go. And then I'm going to blend those two together. Now, as I do this, I'm trying to feel the structure underneath that joint. I think, trying to do two at the same time is not a good idea always. There we go. Okay. Now, as I do that, I can even it out a bit. I can come back in after it dries and clean it up even more. But for a joint like this, I do this side and the other side. Again, I'm going to put a little bit of water on there. And make that bond. Okay. All there is to it. So those are a few techniques that you can use, and really the place that you want to use each one is up to you. Sometimes, for instance, sometimes it will be harder to use straight clay on some of the designs because there's a lot of texture that you might have to be working around. Other times it'll be really easy to make those smooth joins with the straight clay. So for strength, what you want to consider is if there might be a lot of warping or pulling at that seam to pull it apart, that's where you would want to use the more dense material to make that connection. If you're trying to connect something to metal, you might want to use an oil paste for that because then you can get the oil paste to stick better to that already fired material or even a sheet metal or something, and then it won't unstick while it's drying. It'll burn off in the firing phases. So those are a few techniques, and I hope you found them helpful. Please always feel free to reach out to us with any questions, and be sure to subscribe at clayrevolution.com.